Well, what's going on, everybody, and welcome back to the Canadian Football Fanatics. You guys are tuning in tonight to a Week 4's Canada West football show, where Matt Young joins me every week to talk about all things Canada West football. We have an exciting week to talk about. This past week in Week 3, we had some overtime thrillers, we had some close defensive battles, and we have an exciting week ahead to look forward to. So, before Matt joins me, as always, you guys are tuning in today on Instagram, on YouTube. Appreciate you guys as always. Like, comment, subscribe. Let us know how you guys are feeling down below in the comments, in the chat if you guys are here on YouTube. And even if you guys are on Instagram, let us know how you're feeling as well. I can't see the comments or bring them up here on the stream, but unfortunately, we go and afterwards we're able to view them when we have the archive version. So appreciate everybody for tuning in tonight. As always, like I mentioned, Matt Young will be joining us for about half an hour or so to break down last week's action, week number 3, and then preview week 4's matchups here in the Canada West. So before we get going, before Matt joins us here in a matter of minutes, I want to make one big correction here while we are live. I put together a little crew of people to be doing the weekly picks in the Canada West this season. I unfortunately had a error this morning on the post. Gord Randall of KGN is actually by mistake. I know it says 0-9 on the graphic. We will fix that. He is actually 1-8 after looking at the previous picks. So wanted to give Gord, his kudos or his to just let him know that we need to fix that. I'm sure we'll get a little bit of a joking response because it's been a tough start to the year for the fellas here picking Canada West action. I think it's been awesome from an entertainment perspective, from a fan's perspective, and for many different for a few of these different programs to have some life here early on in the season. But there's been a lot of chaos here in the Canada West early, folks, and as we talked about many times here on the show, the parity in the league, or excuse me, in the conference is just unmatched in my opinion across the country. The OUA I think is getting a little bit stronger with maybe 2 or 3 teams there in contention along with Western. Laurier, Windsor. You look at the RSAQ with Laval and Montreal, and then the AUS. X has kind of taken a step back this year. I think we'll see what happens here down the stretch, but in the Canada West, who really knows what's going to happen here for the remainder of the season and then into the playoffs? We saw last year, UBC, the eventual Hardy Cup champions, get taken to the brink 2 times in the Canada West playoffs, winning a close one versus the University of Manitoba in the first round, 28-20, and then beating the University of Alberta on a late comeback there, late fumble. They were able to capitalize, get a touchdown, take advantage, and win that Hardy Cup, get advanced to the national semi, take on St. FX at home, and write their ticket to the Vanier Cup. Was about to say the Grey Cup, and I think that just it's something that I think people need to remind themselves coming into this year, going into the playoffs when that comes, is who knows what's going to happen with this parity that we've seen across the conference. Manitoba sits atop the conference at 3-0. Regina is lone at number 2 at a 2-1 record, and then 4 other teams are tied for 3rd place right now with 1-2 records. That being Alberta, UBC, Saskatchewan, and Calgary. Here through 3 weeks. Week 4 coming up should be an interesting one to see what happens here with a few of these teams. Saskatchewan, UBC playing each other here this week. Both battle of 1 and 2 teams. The other guys are going up against tough opponents. Calgary having to take on Manitoba. I think they do have a little bit going for them, seeing as that it's in Calgary, and then Alberta hosting Regina. I think that's another key matchup this week. And then an interesting one that Alberta's at home, the 1 and 2 team, to take on the 2-1 Regina Rams. So before Matt Young joins us, I guess let's recap last week's action. And that began with a overtime thriller that saw the Saskatchewan Huskies get their first victory of the season, beating the University of Calgary Dinos by a score of 44-40 in overtime. Was a game of big plays, exciting big plays as well. On both sides, were able to hit some, longer type passes. On Saskatchewan's side, Riker Frank was able to bust some pretty big runs out. He finished the day with a remarkable 34 carries, 224 yards, and 3 touchdowns. Yes, folks, you guys heard that right. That is not a video game stat. 34 carries, 224 yards, and 3 touchdowns on the afternoon. On the evening for Riker Frank, running back for the University of Saskatchewan, and he was really, gobbled up all the headlines for Saskatchewan. I think rightfully so. I think there is still some question marks, on that offense. Although they played well, right? 44 points. I still would like to see a little bit more from Anton Amrud before, putting him up there. I think with some of the better quarterbacks in the conference. I know he had actually pretty good afternoon with, 25 of 33. The completions were there, and he didn't hit not a lot of balls hit the ground, but not able to get any touchdowns through the air. I think is something that he needs to work on. The one interception is fine. That's gonna kind of happen throughout this season, throughout a game, as long as it doesn't creep to what we saw last year with, I believe he had 18 interceptions last season, which is just way too many throughout a 10-game season. Almost two a game is costing your team valuable points, valuable possessions. And he was able to have 276 yards, not quite over 300 yards, with Riker Frank having over 200 yards. And throughout the rushing, they almost got close to. As I look at the stats here, 224 from Riker Frank, Cade Miller 32, about 250 there. 17 from their short yardage quarterback, 12 from Anton Amaru, and then a 6 yards in there. So about, 30, 36, about 80, 200, probably 80, 90 yards or so on the ground. I think it's probably, you know, a given that, you're probably not going to pass for 300 yards or over 300 yards. 276 is probably a good amount considering that, you almost got close to, 600 yards total offense, which is pretty good. But I think there's another level there for Saskatchewan as I kind of, you know, flip flop on kind of Saskatchewan there. I do think there's still another ceiling, is why I'm kind of waiting to see. But overall, Riker Frank, Daniel Weave's been very impressive for them all season long. I know he's kind of battling through some stuff, but it was a little bit more of a quieter game for him. I believe only 2 receptions for 13 yards, and expect to have still a remarkable rest of the season for Daniel Weave. I believe he had 300 yards through 2 games, if I'm not mistaken. So still on a pretty good pace considering some of these maybe quieter games here, or after a quiet game 3. But I would expect Daniel Weave to get back to the level of play that we've seen him through the first 2 games. And to go to Calgary, man, I think arguably one of the better defenses in the conference. I think this is a team that's led by their defense. Don Britton had his best game of the 3 so far this year. I believe he was close to, or maybe might have been over 300 yards, with his brother actually getting 8 catches for 181 yards. Let's quickly here check. He was actually 17 of 32 for 317 and a touchdown. Don Britton's best game on the year. It had been a quiet, start to the season for them offensively. New head coach, obviously, with Ryan Sheehan coming in, adapting to a new system. So, kind of to be expected. That being said, I think, we'd like to see a little bit more from them because of how much their defense has been doing for them. With the, previous game there against the University of Alberta, having 3 pick sixes, 4 total picks, 5, I think, total turnovers in that game. Their defense has really been, keeping them in games, giving them opportunities to win, winning them games here so far. So I think the offense, if they can kind of rise to the occasion, pick back up, or get maybe to the level that I think they can. Obviously, missing a few guys from last season, so maybe to be expected for the slow start. But I think this Calgary team could be a dangerous one, and I think it says that with everyone being at 1 and 2 and having every opportunity to go climb up the rest of the standings. So perfect timing here as I kind of go around in circles on the first game. I'm going to bring in our guest, Matt Young from CTV Saskatoon. Matt, thanks for joining us. How you doing?
Hey, not too bad. Good to be with you.
Awesome, Matt. So I was just kind of recapping about the Friday night thriller there with the overtime win for the Saskatchewan Huskies over the University of Calgary. What were your thoughts on the 44-40 victory for the Huskies?
Well, I can tell you this: it was Rockinger in that game, and that was one of the best games I've seen in a long time in Canada West. Double overtime. I mean, how often do we even see that at all? So, I mean, it was fantastic. A game that went into double overtime. And how about Riker Frank? Over 200 yards on the ground. He had a couple of big runs. And the more I see him, the more I really like this kid. He's got some power and he's got some speed. And, quite frankly, he's tough to bring down. So, I mean, when you look at that, I mean, the Huskies have got to be happy. They moved the ball, I think, a little bit more efficiently than the Calgary Dinos did for most of that game. Anton Amundred had some nice passes. So, I mean, I think if you're Scott Flory, you got to be pretty happy. I mean, you come away, a big win against the Calgary Dinos. And then, you know what, for the Huskies, I think that was huge. I mean, I think they needed to get that. And all in all, I think if you're the Saskatchewan Huskies right now, you're pretty happy. Big homecoming game and a 44-40 win in double OT.
We're not going to skip over it, Matt. Is that a new nickname for Riker Frank there? And quite frankly, I like that you threw that in there with the nicknames that you've been giving out.
I threw it out there a couple of times last year. I mean, to be frank about it, he's tough to bring down, and he is. I mean, he's got some strong legs, and we saw him get through a couple of waves of tacklers in that game against Calgary. So I like Riker Frank. I'm high on him. I know the Saskatchewan Huskies certainly are too. And Calgary has some good pieces there, and that game could have gone either way. But I said, you know what? The Huskies, they won by a hair. They got through it, and they get a big win over the Calgary Dinos, who are a good team. I mean, they're proving they can beat anybody. Look what they did, to Alberta a couple of weeks ago, right? So big win for the Saskatchewan Huskies there, and a fantastic game, double overtime. Doesn't get a whole lot better than that.
Yeah, well said from a Huskies perspective. They're getting their first win of the season. Big win for them. Riker Frank was able to break out, and Daniel Lee, a couple of those stars on that offense were kept quiet, and it was nice to see. I think they can explode offensively here down the stretch. But to get back to Calgary's perspective, to lose a close one like that, obviously I'm sure frustrating. But I think we've seen the best game from Dom Britton, and then their defense has been up to the standard with maybe a guy that I'd like to get your opinion on, Nate Boschman here, who we've seen get off to a hell of a start with the 2 pick sixes last week and then another interception this game. What are your thoughts on Calgary and that defense and how they continue to lead that team?
I mean, that defense has stepped up at a number of crucial times. And I know that they lost that game against the Saskatchewan Huskies. But look, Nate Boschman is definitely making a case for some CFL eyes to be watching him. I mean, he's somebody who's all over the field. He does a great job at just kind of being in the right place at the right time, and he must have superior vision. And I'm wondering if he's noticing things in the film room. But I like Nate Boschman. I like how he positions himself, where he is on the field. He covers a lot of field, and he's a very, very strong part of that Calgary secondary. And I think that anybody, I'm interested to see what Jackson Tuszynski and Manitoba do against Calgary. Anybody who faces the Calgary Dinos, that passing attack is going to have to keep an eye on Nate Boschman, because he has been solid so far for them. And a key reason why, obviously, they played as well as they did against Alberta. And again, that defense, if Calgary's going to win games, that defense is going to have to make plays. They didn't make quite enough against the Saskatchewan Huskies. Maybe they can this week.
Yeah, so let's get to matchup number 2 last week, which was the Manitoba Bison staying undefeated, getting a close victory over the University of Alberta, who we just talked about, 24-23. A ton of ways to go here, Matt. I will allow you to probably, touch on the Bisons a little bit. My biggest takeaway, honestly, is that I think Matthew Peterson is arguably the best player in the conference. Over 200 yards. We saw what he was, what he meant to the University of Alberta there. The past week, the loss to University of Alberta, they just couldn't get anything going offensively. Some of the turnovers, I think maybe can credit, to maybe Hetlinger maybe feeling like he has to do a little bit more without that star running back in the backfield. We saw him over 200 yards this week. And I think it kind of got outshined a little bit because of Riker Frank's performance with the 3 touchdowns, him over 200 yards as well. But Matthew Peterson, 28 carries as well, 201 yards, 7.2 yards per carry. And I believe he didn't have a long over 20. So, was able to, kind of grind out some of those tough carries as well and be a very big impact for his team. So what were your takeaways on the 24-23 victory for the University of Manitoba?
Well, let's talk about Matthew Peterson. I mean, absolutely. And he got a lot of carries, but 200 yards. And anytime your running back runs for 200 yards, you think, okay, they should probably win that game. They're up against a very good Manitoba team. First of all, I like the idea by Alberta to go for two. Why not go for the win, right? Last play of the game, you're taking on the Manitoba Bisons, one of the best teams in Canada West. Why not go for the win and try to win that game? But you got to hand it to Nick Conway when they go for two, getting his hand in there on what was a pretty good throw, I thought, from Eli Hetlinger into the end zone for that 2-point conversion. So, I mean, I think if you're Alberta, you're walking away thinking you played well. That was a pretty good team. They didn't lose to a winless team or anything like that. But let's talk about Manitoba, because these Manitoba Bisons, I mean, they know where the Buffalo roam. And right now, the Buffalo are roaming at the top of Canada West right now. I had them winning this game by a hair, and that's pretty much what happened, right? I mean, I wouldn't say they barely beat Alberta. It was two good teams going at it. Manitoba managed to squeak out a win. Jackson Tuszynski, third best passing efficiency in U Sports, only one interception throughout the first 3 games of the season. He's good with the football. And I think the Manitoba Bisons, I've said there's something special going on right now out in Winnipeg. There is, with the way everybody's playing and Brian Dobie, and it's his last season. And I think that the Manitoba Bisons right now, they've asserted themselves to be the number 1 team in Canada West, and they're undefeated, and we'll see how far they can go and what kind of run they can make. But they've definitely sent notice to everybody that they're going to be in the running for a Hardy Cup this year. I felt Alberta coming into this season was probably the number 1 team. I still think that they can be. Regina's looking pretty good right now, though, and we'll talk about their game against UBC. But the Manitoba Bisons, I mean, they're sitting there alone. They're up front. They're at the top. And it's going to take a good team playing a good game on both sides of the football and not making a lot of mistakes to try and knock them off right now. I thought that was a good game. Alberta played well, and I think Alberta is still a very good team. I think them, Regina, and Manitoba, I mean, you could throw in the Huskies there too. I mean, they're all pretty good this year. There's no doormats in Canada West. That's what makes it so tough. That's why we're not doing so well in our picks right now, because there's been upsets and everybody's kind of been all over the map. But one team that's been very consistent is Manitoba, the Bisons, and they've got a great defense there with Nick Conway, and I think they're just going to be very, very tough for a lot of squads to beat this year.
Yeah, and they were without actually one of their other captains, Nick Thomas. I believe he was at his sister's wedding. They announced on the broadcast there. So a big time leader, a guy that's CFL pedigree, spent some time in some training camps. But I think the biggest storyline for me, and it's been talked about numerous times on this show throughout Canada West coverage of just that Brian Dobie aspect of that storyline that's going to follow them all year long. It has obviously motivated that locker room very heavily. He talked about it on the KGN show this week with our friend Gord Randall and Jim Mullen, who Gord helps us out with the picks. He joined them earlier in the week and mentioned of coming to the team there. I think it was early in training camp and kind of sitting them down and letting them know, giving them the news that this would be their last year. And I can only imagine how that group would take that and kind of speed, not need to be any more motivated, but how much you would that would light another fire up under you. So I guess any other thoughts, Matt, before we get into the last game this week on Brian Dobie and the Manitoba Bisons?
I would just say this: Jackson Tuszynski is spreading the ball around. Everybody's getting a touch and everybody's getting in on it. Muli Yitna getting some catches in there too. And Ege Kasama, I say turning up the gas, baby. And he's going to do that. And I think that Manitoba team, that is a well-oiled machine. I thought at the beginning of the year, like I said, I had Alberta just a shave above them to start the season as who I thought might finish first. But hey, you know what? Kudos to the Manitoba Bisons. They've got things crisp, they've got things tight, and that's the way that Brian Dobie likes it, and they've been rewarded for it.
Yeah, there's a number of guys on that offense. I think another one, Vaughn Lloyd, is kind of gone under the radar.
Yeah,
under the radar.
Everybody is chipping in a little bit, and it's working, and the defense is not allowing a whole ton of points. So, I mean, the Manitoba Bisons right now, there's a reason they're on top of the Canada West standings.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's get into the last game of the week, which was UBC pulling out a defensive matchup, the victory 14-12 over Regina. Not a lot of offense in this one, folks. There was 2 first quarter touchdowns, one by Derek Engel, if I'm not mistaken, and another one by Noah Pelche. And for the remainder of the game, Regina had a couple field goals in there, if I'm not mistaken. And then UBC was able to score late. I'm still a little bit kind of puzzled because a lot of the same guys, other than those two tackles on that UBC offense. We've talked about the kind of struggles on defense. They were able to have a pretty good effort here, 12 points allowed. I think it's hard to kind of nitpick at any holes on a game like that. But offensively, I just feel like they really haven't looked the same. Garrett Rooker through 3 games is not the same, Garrett Rooker that we saw last year, that led one of the best offenses in the country. Isaiah Knight is still, I feel like, there's another level for him to get at too, with NFL scouts kind of getting his attention in the offseason. So they're able to get the win. And I think what probably they're hanging their hat on is just that, right? That they haven't played their best game. They're 1-2, and they're one victory away from catching a Regina at 2-1 if they're able to fall off, or University of Alberta, whatever it may be. So things are chaotic, like you said. But what were your thoughts on UBC getting their first win on the year?
Well, I mean, I think if you're the UBC Thunderbirds, it's a sigh of relief, because it's difficult when you fall to 0-3 in Canada West and then try and climb back in it. So I think for the UBC Thunderbirds, job well done. You're right. I mean, it was a defensive battle for the most part. But I mean, the UBC Thunderbirds and Blake Nill, they're going to try and find a way to right the ship. And perhaps this is that turning point for them. And I think for the UBC Thunderbirds, because when you look at the stats, I mean, Isaiah Knight going over 100 yards rushing. Garrett Rooker, he did look a little bit better in this game. They got Sam Davenport and Shamar McBean going, 8 catches between the two of them. In fact, 9 different receivers had a catch in that game. And so you wonder, where does it fall apart? And the reality is that you need to get touchdowns, not field goals. I know Flannery Fleck missed 2 field goals in that game, but you need touchdowns, not field goals. And the UBC Thunderbirds, it's all about finishing. For the Regina Rams, you're looking at one that maybe you think you got away, right? I mean, the Regina Rams have an opportunity to keep up with Manitoba and go undefeated, at least for the first 3 games in Canada West, but 2 fumbles in the fourth quarter. And I think that Mark McConkey is looking at as missed opportunities, right? So I think ball security is going to be a big thing in practice. I mean, Noah Pelche had a pretty good game, but the reality is that I think the Regina Rams are thinking, you know what, they didn't quite get it done. And this was one that they felt that they should have had, or at least could have had. Whenever you hold a team to 14 points, I mean, if your offense can click, you should get it done, right? And kudos to the UBC defense, absolutely. And that UBC Thunderbirds defense has done a pretty good job, and they did a pretty good job last week. So, I mean, I think if you're the Regina Rams, you're 2-1. You're doing okay, right? You've got a couple of victories, and I think for the UBC Thunderbirds, you're kind of back in it, because I don't think it would have been. I would say this: it would have been pretty tough to fall back to 0-3 with the schedule they got coming up, and then try and climb back into it. It's just very, very difficult when you're only playing 8 games in the season.
Yep, I think well said about a sigh of relief for UBC. To touch on Regina, I think rightfully so. They've had a chip on their shoulder coming into this year. I think a lot of teams, the coaches polled projecting them 6 coming into the year. Now they've started the year with a very good year, and I think they're legit. And I think that's where I kind of want to, I see friend co-host of mine on the weekly show and friend of the contributor to the channel here, Blake was chiming in here in the chat, but he mentioned when we released our weekly picks of everybody picked Alberta going into this game this week. Regina gonna prove that they're for real, and I think there's only 6 teams, so we have to pick a winner and a loser. Sometimes we're going to have to pick against the team. It doesn't necessarily mean that we don't think that they're for real, because I think they've proven that they are, with, a great offense led by whoever it may be at quarterback, Owen Seaben, Noah Pelche. They have a very nice, set of weapons, whether it be at the running back position, in that receiving core. And then their defense is I think, very underrated coming into this year, with some veterans in that defense. Cameron Ma kind of been around for a while. Tyreek Pullis, some of those guys on the defensive line. And I believe Delaney Robinson's kind of been banged up as well. And obviously with the Sombacks back there in the secondary, they have some talent. And I think they are for real. It's just, I think, a long-winded way of me saying, I think Alberta's a good team. I think Regina's a good team.
Yeah.
And,
when we make these picks, I've said it, we're not choosing between good teams and not so good teams. You're making picks between good teams and other good teams. And so that's what makes it so difficult, especially this year in Canada West. And usually you have that one team that they're going to struggle. And right now, it seems like anybody can beat anybody. That's what makes it so difficult. And we had really close games this week. We had one that went into double overtime. We had one that came down to a play to a 2-point conversion play, and we had another game that was a 2-point defensive slugfest, I would call it. So, I mean, you know what? We had some close games this week, and it'll be fun to see what comes up next week in Canada West.
And I think that's just a big reminder, folks, to tune in to some Canada West action if you can, because it's can't miss stuff. It's great football, great product, and you never know what you're going to see. What is it? 7 points separated all three games on the weekend last weekend.
Yeah,
with 2-point victory for
incredibly
UBC.
close.
Yeah, 1-point victory for Manitoba, and then the 4 points for 4-1, 7 points through the three games there. So just incredible action. And like Matt mentioned, we're not picking between good and bad teams. We're picking between good and good teams. So, Matt, before we got to get you out of here, let's talk about quickly maybe why we picked some of our matchups this week. I actually saw a listener was tuned in on Instagram. He asked what we thought about the Regina-Alberta matchup. And we obviously made our picks, posted those as well. We had a clean sweep on Alberta, but maybe give us a little bit of a reason why. We kind of just talked about, we think Regina is for real, and it's no disrespect to them by any means. It's just I think we both agree that I think Alberta is a very good team. You mentioned that you thought they'd be one of the better teams going into the season. So what are you looking forward to this matchup, and maybe why did you pick Alberta?
Well, I mean, I'll say this, and Regina, absolutely. I could pick Regina too in this game. This is again another one. I'm like, who do I really go with? I think that this could be a bounce back game for Alberta, and they're going to need it. And I think they're coming off a game against Manitoba where it came down to that late 2-point conversion play that they're looking at it, that they felt that they should have beaten the Manitoba Bisons. And you have the Regina Rams on the other side who are probably thinking, you know what, they had a chance to go 3-0 and defeat the UBC Thunderbirds. So I mean, do I think that this is going to be a blowout? Absolutely. I'm thinking that this game could go into overtime as well. The only reason I got Alberta ahead is because I'm looking at Matthew Peterson, and I'm thinking if the Peterson train gets going, I mean, it's always hard to stop. I mean, it really is. Like I say, I've said it a few times. I think it's a freight train with shoulder pads, and he just motors. And I think the Regina Rams, again, if they can slow Matthew Peterson, that's a huge, huge step to getting a victory. And they're going to have to do that. Eli Hetlinger puts up a good ball on a nice high arc, and if he can hit his receivers, he's going to do well too. I think that Regina defense is very, very good. And I think on offense, I mean, Noah Pelche's proven that he can compete with the best of them. And he's a guy, by the way, I don't believe he's actually thrown an interception yet this year. So Noah Pelche, again, is a guy who just doesn't turn it over. And that's why it's so hard to select between these two teams. I've got Alberta today. I would not be surprised, though, if the Regina Rams beat them. I'm only picking Alberta because I got to pick one. And I'm going with the Alberta Golden Bears because I still believe, especially with Matthew Peterson and that offense, that they can make things happen. But if the Regina Rams come out with a victory, that would not surprise me. And there may be something special going on in Regina with Mark McConkey and company as well.
Yeah, well said. I totally agree with you. I think kind of, my thinking through this game was that I think the best player on the field is going to be Matthew Peterson. I think he's going to give Alberta a chance to win as long as they can, not turn the football over, cash in when they're in, scoring opportunities. I think this will be once again another close game. And for me, through 3 weeks, I think it's no disrespect to say that, Regina is probably the third best team. I think that's we saw last year in the playoffs. I said it at the beginning of the show. UBC wins the conference. They host Manitoba, and they get taken to the brink both times in the Canada West semifinal and in the Hardy Cup. So you never know what seed you may be. Playoffs are going to be a bloodbath, and on any given Sunday, excuse me, is one of my favorite quotes. On any given Saturday, you never know who's going to win. So should be a good one. I'm excited to tune in for this one because I think it could go either way. Hopefully, for our sake, Matt, Alberta pulls one off because I don't know how many times or how many more we can keep slipping here with the picks before people start tuning away. But next game on the bracket was Saskatchewan and UBC. What are your thoughts on this one with all of us, I believe, but the East Coaster in Connor picking Saskatchewan?
Yeah, I mean, this is going to be a good game too. And you got the UBC Thunderbirds and the Saskatchewan Huskies. Of course, Saskatchewan coming off that big win against the Calgary Dinos in double overtime, and they're going to be on a huge high. And UBC coming off a big win against the Regina Rams. You know what? Like, and again, I looked at this. That this again was a very very tough game to choose because you're choosing against two teams that played very well last week. They played close games. I've got the UBC Thunderbirds only because I think that Garrett Rooker is going to find a way eventually to put points on the board. And while I think that Saskatchewan defense is good, if Garrett Rooker and Sam Davenport and company can find a way to convert field goals into touchdowns or get in the red zone and actually punch it in, that's going to force Anton Amager and the Huskies to respond. And yes, they got weapons, absolutely, including Riker Frank. But I think UBC is going to be on a mission, and I give them the edge because I do believe at some point Garrett Rooker is going to have a great game where he gets it all together and they put 25 or 30 points on the board. I think for the Saskatchewan Huskies, they're very good. They've got to watch. They can't afford any special team mistakes or anything like that. And I mean, certainly Scott Flory is going to hammer it into his team this week that they can't afford anything like blocked punts or anything like that. So, and he's a very good coach as well. So, I mean, I got UBC again, tough. I think UBC, if they win, it's by a point, but it absolutely would not shock me if it went the other way and Scott Flory and company came out with a victory. Sometimes you literally just got to flip a coin on it.
Yep. So I apologize, folks. We're going to jump ahead so we can get Matt out of here in time. Matt, what are your thoughts on the final game of the weekend? I will come circle back around on the matchup. Manitoba and Calgary. Obviously, I think we all swept. We all went with Manitoba, but maybe give us before you get out of here. What would be a recipe for Calgary to pull this one off?
Well, I think the recipe is the same thing they did to Alberta, and that's the defense, right? I mean, if they can stop Jackson Tuszynski, if they can cause some turnovers or cause some interceptions, they're going to win that game. And I think, when you look at what Calgary's defense did against the Alberta Golden Bears a couple of weeks ago, if they can emulate that and they can force Manitoba into third and longs or cause some turnovers or cause some interceptions and obviously not take any penalties themselves, they're going to have a chance to win. You know what? Had their defense come up a little bit bigger against the Saskatchewan Huskies, they probably win that game too. So I mean, I think that right now for the Manitoba Bisons, that high octane offense, it's moving and it's doing well. And I think, again, there's something special in Manitoba, but what's the recipe? I think it's just like the Alberta game. Okay, you go in there, you're playing a team that's undefeated. What do? You got to make things difficult for A.K. Kasama and Vaughn Lloyd and Jackson Tuszynski, and you got to make some plays on offense. But I think if Calgary can come up with a pick or two or a fumble here or there or something like that, it's going to make things difficult for the Manitoba Bisons. And again, Jackson Tuszynski, 1 interception so far through 3 games. That's not bad. Of course, we know what happened to Eli Hetlinger a couple of weeks ago against this Calgary defense. So I'm interested to see what Nate Boschman can do and how they're gonna cover guys like A.K. Kasama in that game against Manitoba. So can Calgary win? Absolutely. Their defense needs to make a couple of big plays and show that they can do it, which we've seen before, and they'll be able to beat the Manitoba Bisons. But the Buffalo are roaming, man. And when the Buffalo roam, they're hard to stop. And right now they're on top of Canada West. And so that's why I got Manitoba ahead of Calgary. I don't think they blow them out. But there's something going on out there out in Winnipeg that's special. And that's why I got the Manitoba Bisons in this one.
Yes, well said, Matt. 5:30. I know you got to go, so I appreciate you for joining us as always, Matt. Take care, and we will see you next Wednesday or next Thursday. Excuse me.
All right, we'll see you later. Enjoy the football this weekend.
Thanks, Matt. Appreciate it. That was Matt Young from CTV Saskatoon, as well as Canada West TV analyst. So to quickly put a bow on things, I guess I will kind of give my thoughts. Although I agree with mostly what Matt was saying there. I took UBC as well in the Saskatchewan at UBC game. I would say I have a little bit more pause in the Garrett Rooker, I think, confidence that Matt maybe shares. But he thinks, it's only a matter of time until Garrett Rooker has a performance like we saw him have many times last year. What gives me some confidence is I think it's in UBC, number one. I think they're going to be very motivated that they are 0-2 on the year at home. to get their first victory in front of the home crowd at Thunderbird Stadium. And then I think they have Isaiah Knight, who arguably is one of the better running backs in the conference. Riker Frank sure is making a bid for that. That rank, I guess that's what you want to say. I think as of now, it's Matthew Peterson and kind of everybody else with a number of good backs around the conference. But Braden Stubbs, Isaiah Knight, Riker Frank, I think are in that kind of second echelon, second tier, if you will. And Isaiah's on the verge of breaking through, and I think being one of the elite backs. I think he is an elite back. I think I just very highly on Matthew Peterson and his ability. So I think I have him in kind of a tier, by himself until proven otherwise. That's just me personally. I know a lot of people are high on Isaiah Knight, specifically NFL scouts. So maybe who knows what I'm thinking. And maybe listen to the NFL scouts that are coming to UBC, talking to Theo Benedette and Giovanni Manu, asking about their running back. So I got UBC because I think Isaiah Knight's going to be able to have a nice game for them, control the football, keep that Saskatchewan offense off the field, who, we saw them kind of start to a little bit of get, the wheels turn a little bit on offense last week there. Kind of had been, a little bit of the Riker Frank, Daniel Weeb show, and it was more of the Riker Frank show last week. But I think if Daniel Weeb is able to get back to some of the numbers that he was having in the first two games, they're going to be a deadly offense to slow down, especially with a quarterback like Anton Amaru. I know he kind of is a little bit risky more often than not, especially last year, more so than this year. He's been able to take care of the football, but he's going to give his guys opportunities to come down with the football and make big plays for that Huskies offense. So should be another interesting one. I'm going to go with UBC, and who knows what could happen. I think this is the biggest, probably 50-50 matchup, in my opinion, on the weekend. And I guess lastly, let's get to Manitoba and Calgary. Hopefully, friend of the program, Steen, isn't still watching. I saw he was in the Instagram chat a little bit earlier. University of Calgary Dinos defensive back, playing that boundary half. Off to a good start. So shout out to Steen for playing well this year, buddy. Rooting for you, definitely always every week. Keeping an eye out for number 41 if he's making plays. That being said, though, a lot, kind of no excuses, but I'm going to go with Manitoba. I think they are the more well-rounded team, obviously at 3-0, undefeated still. I love that Calgary defense, and I'm very excited to see how they're going to compete this upcoming week. Burst that Manitoba Bison's offense with guys like Tuchinski, as Matt was mentioning, no interceptions yet this season. Braden Stubbs in the backfield, Vaughn Lloyd, A.K. Gassama, Dejan Lejour, what was it, Milan Yitna that caught the touchdown there in the first quarter last week. Was able to kind of deep over route almost, and was able to find Jasinski was able to find him for, I believe it was like a 40-yard touchdown or something like that. That was set up by a guy like Vaughn Lloyd. Vaughn Lloyd kind of falling in that, don't want to maybe put the tag on him, but the Nick Dembski path, former running back, moves to slot receiver, University of Manitoba alum. I believe they went to, they're both Winnipeg guys. I don't know if they went to the same high school or not, but been a very good weapon for them this year. The making the switch, Brian Dobie, good call. Whoever whomever made that switch was, had some, looking into the future and made a good call there. So, it is going to be an exciting matchup when Calgary's defense is on the field versus Manitoba. I think where I'm more confident is in Manitoba's defense versus that Calgary offense. Don Britton had his best game. I think maybe their snowball is hopefully starting to build, and once they push them down the hill, who knows? But I think as of now, I still am a little bit skeptical on that offense, and would like to see a little bit more on them before I have some faith in Calgary. Manitoba, I think, is just too much of a good unit on offense and on defense. They're riding high right now, feeling themselves, and you know what they say, confidence is a hell of a drug. They're playing with a lot of confidence right now in that locker room, playing for their head coach on his farewell tour. So should be a good one in Calgary, which is maybe a factor that I think is maybe a little bit underestimated. Maybe I'm overlooking it a little bit that Manitoba having to go into Calgary, playing in McMahon. Factors come into play there when you're having to play on the road, away from home, not in the around your familiar facilities, stuff like that. And this is another one in the Canada West that I think could be a close one. I have more confidence in Manitoba than I do in Calgary as a team. So I'm going to go with the Manitoba Bisons to stay undefeated. But who knows what could happen in the Canada West this year, because it has been so unpredictable. It's been incredible. I would love to be it. I would love for it to be a little bit more predictable, and our records might look a little better. And speaking about records, I guess to recap our weekly picks here, talking about Matt and I's. We will bring in Gord Randall and Connor O'Neill. It's Connor O'Neill from CF Perspective, Gord Randall from KGN on TSN, Crown Gridiron Nation, Sullivan Heights football head coach as well. As I mentioned, correction to Gord's he is actually 1-9 on the year, not 0 or 1-8, excuse me, not 0-9. But this week we all have Alberta, Regina, and Alberta. In the Saskatchewan UBC, we all have UBC except for Connor, as I mentioned. Connor taking the Huskies in that matchup. And then we all have Manitoba in the final game on Saturday, Manitoba and Calgary. So that should do it. That should about do it for the Canada West Football Show this week. Another 40-minute show where we're talking all things Canada West. We recap last week's action, preview this upcoming matchups, give our little reasoning of why we're picking so. Although you might not be wanting to, listen to our expertise, if that's what you want to call it, you definitely don't want to call it expertise through 3 weeks, considering what's our combined record. I got 2, 6, 8. I think we got 9 victories through 3 weeks, which is not good for us. Great for Canada West action and getting people to want to tune in, because you never know who's going to win on a weekly basis. There's not an easy matchup this year. There's not an easy picking game where, we know UBC's coming in. We're going to dog them. We're going to be up by, 20, 30 points by halftime, be able to roll our backups and get, our underclassmen some reps. Doesn't work like that in the Canada West this year. Going to be, a long season, and it's going to be interesting to see what happens come playoff time, because, injuries happen. It's a game of attrition, of, losing guys, having to, find ways to, plug in backups, get the same level of play from backups that you do starters, and just, scheme around things. Maybe you have to, move your field half to, boundary half, and he has to, adapt to playing a new position. You bring in a rookie, has to play field half, and whatever it may be. It's going to be interesting to see how teams adjust down the back half of the year. We're only 3 weeks in, folks. Still a little bit of ways to go. Not even at the halfway point quite yet. Week 4 will be finished this week. Next week, we'll be talking about all Week 4 action. Week 5 will be approaching. So that will do it on today's episode of the Canada West Football Show. If you guys appreciate all this, if you guys are liking all the Canada West coverage, please let us know in the chat if you guys are tuning in here live. If not, let us know in the Instagram chat. In the Instagram chat and comments, I guess. Because people are tuning in there tonight. Let's quickly actually check back with the Instagram crowd. Let's see if anybody's checking in. No more comments on Instagram. But if you guys are enjoying this, let us know in the comments below. It would be awesome to hear some feedback from you guys. I know there's been quite a bit of feedback. Although it's been negative, it's been in a good, fun, majority of the time, joking way. I know as a former player, not in any Canada West or U Sports setting, but as a former player, you got to use stuff like that to motivate you. The famous Last Dance documentary, we saw a lot about Michael Jordan and what he used for any sort of motivation to get him, to that level of play. So I totally understand that and get that. That being said, one last time, Regina Rams, we do not have any personal feelings towards you. We really think you guys are a good team. I think it's just that this year, you probably want us to pick against you because of how bad our record's been. But all jokes aside, very high on you guys. Very excited to see you guys doing well. Friend of the program, friend of the show, Jackson Sombach had come on in the spring. Very grateful for his time. Did a Canada West season preview with Josh Donnelly, offensive coordinator. So really enjoy that program. They're also one of the heavier recruited CGFL teams in the country. So a lot of junior roots on that team, and easy to root for them from my perspective. I'm just trying to do my best at picking who I think is going to win. And like I said, all jokes aside, maybe you want us to pick against you because that means you're probably going to get a win more often than not. But appreciate you guys for tuning in to this Canada West Football Show, and we will see you guys next week.